Let Frank begin.
Good afternoon. I'm Frank Boland, and on behalf of the Royal Bermuda Yacht Club, the Cruising Club of America, the Bermuda Race Organizing Committee, welcome to Bermuda. I think this appeared to be something of a threat in Newport. And I say, you're going to get to where? And you're going down to Bermuda. An interesting ride, huh?
Yeah.
All sorts of interesting features to deal with. Some of them meteorological. Let's see if this does its thing. Some of it's oceanographic. You know that I like to play with the altimetry-based plot of circulation. We could put up a few of the other models, but I can say that this worked reasonably well for us. What we're here to hear is how well it worked for you, and some of the other ones as well. Whether it's Mercator or Mercator, whoever's pronouncing the word these days, or the real-time ocean forecast from NOAA. But we're also interested in problems you might have had, successes you might have had in communications. There's a fair number of people playing with satellite phones these days beyond the go. And problems that may have been associated with that. I can tell you, some of you are going to find out that you have problems that you didn't even know you had when you get home and get the bill. But that's another story. That was certainly our experience in the 22 race. The format, the hatred of paper, the love of, and I won't say social networks, but the internet, good, bad, or indifferent, the new starting area, what it might have meant or not meant, and then of course, if you read anything of the little write-up I did in the race blurb about the 22 race and the conditions we had there, if you recall, and for those of you that weren't there, we had something of a cold front, maybe a double cold front, with a little bit of a trough between them, and some of us got out in a nice southwesterly breeze, and anticipating in fairly short order a shift as the cold front goes by into the northwest. And that happened. It just didn't happen in an hour or two after the start. And we had every sail in the bag up over the next 12 to 18 hours before we did get into the northwesterly. Funny thing, it looked an awful lot when we were sitting off the beaver tail for 3 or 4 hours after the start. The start of this race looked an awful lot like the start of the 22. So there were some lessons learned, and the devil is in the details, as we've said. So this is a discussion among friends. We were asked for an agenda. There is no agenda. We always like to think that we can tell the story the way it is, and some of us have been accused of really knowing how to keep a guy in his place. So that's what it's all about. Discussion among friends. And I guess we're being recorded, and I know that some folks have called in to see if it will be broadcast out, those folks that can't be here. So don't be afraid to express your opinions. I'm going to start out. I went down this morning, another funny story, Commodore. I went down this morning to get a printout of the results, to find that it's difficult to print out the results in the current format. So we don't have all of the results sitting here. I have the finals on all the different divisions. But so we're also looking, who are you? And what did you experience, and what would you like to share? And we can start with an old friend and an overall winner this time for the boat, again, Karina, and the Navigator, Mr. friend Devin. Young Devin.
thanks, Frank, and thanks everyone for being here. I honestly can't tell you what a thrill it is to be here and to be able to talk to you all. And I'd be remiss not to thank the Pot Reeves and the Potts family for the legacy that is Carina and the opportunity to sail on it. And the whole Carina team that pushed every inch, every minute of that whole race to have my navigation matter. If they didn't do what we did, navigation wouldn't have mattered. So, thank you. And I guess, am I answering your questions, or am I talking about the race?
Race, absolutely.
Okay, I'll tell you a little bit about the race. What we did is we broke the race up into 4 races. And conventionally, I break it up into 3 races: Newport to the stream, through the stream to Bermuda. With the start up the bay, we changed it around a little bit to say there's a 4th race here. There's a race out of the bay, and we actually we switched roles a little bit. And I want to give credit to Peter Bauer on our boat, and he was kind of our inshore tactician. I said, Peter, you got race 1. I'll take over at race 2. Let me do my thing after that, but get us out of the bay. And kudos to him. He put us in a position to get out of the bay very well, playing the currents, looking at the competition, looking at the winds, and it's a long race. So whether that mattered or not, it mattered psychologically. To come out of the bay in the position we did was very good for our heads, quite frankly. That was race 1. Race 2 to the stream. Things shook out as expected. I think this was one of the things we said in our pre-race meeting. This probably was not going to be the most technically or tactically challenging race we've ever done. It was kind of one weather system, one wind direction, and it was going to be a grind. It was just going to be a grind of having the right sail up, having the right drivers, having the right speeds, pushing. This is my 14th Bermuda race, and I can clearly say this was the most uncomfortable Bermuda race I've ever done. I don't know, it wasn't the windiest, it wasn't maybe the hardest, but it was uncomfortable. And pushing through that uncomfort was a challenge, but that's not navigation, so near here to there. Race number 2 to the stream was really, and I think to Frank's point, thinking about the data. In this race, it's not so much a question of do I have enough data? Everyone has enough data. It's too much data. How can you sift the data to get to meaningful conclusions? So I think the primary component there, wind, we said, okay, wind we have a decent enough handle on. Currents, maybe not so much. As Frank said, the RTOFs, I think, show 20 miles west of the Mercator. Jennifer Clark's routing and Current Lab's routing both really suggested Mercator positions. And we relied on that. And we went to routing points really maybe a bit further east than in the fullness of time we realized we should have. What we watched was the Hound team, because we were watching them quite closely, and Ed Cesar is a top-notch, world-class navigator, and he ended up entering the stream further west than us. And maybe it was a position midway between the Mercator and Artoff's positions. And when that was happening, it was a little too late for us to adjust. But what I was realizing is east is always going to be easy. Either the Gulf Stream is going to take, west is going to be easy. Either the Gulf Stream is going to take you back east, or the wind's going to take you back east. But if you don't get west enough early, it's going to be hard to get that. So we were probably in the fleet, maybe 3/4 of the way west. We weren't one of the westernmost boats going into the stream, but we were always playing a level of conservatism of shortest distance, point the boat at Bermuda. All other things being equal, those 2 mantras will take you far. So that was race 2. Race 2 worked out okay for us. When we entered the stream, we were not quite as far west as we would have liked it been.
And you got a good ride from the meander.
The meander was amazing. I forget the number exactly, but I believe on the final person kitchen shoals or thereabouts near the finish, our B&G trip log read 595. on a 636 plus a little bit of tacking, maybe a 640 mile race, we're showing 50 miles of current driven advantage. We were showing 4 and 5 knots for easily 10 hours down the track. And what we were doing in that time was just making sure we kept the boat direction aligned with the current direction. So we did keep adjusting to say, all right, we keep cutting across the stream, watching the speeds go up, speeds go up. When they hit about 4 knots, we then aligned ourselves to that direction, which I think was 155-ish or so. It was close enough to Bermuda that we just said, okay, let's take that, even though it's a little bit east, we'll still take it. So we were fairly happy with what I'll call race number 3. But race number 4 is when things got scary, because Frank here studied these things like they were going out of style and did a job on us. And Ed had done a job on, Frank did a job on us to the east, and Ed did a job on us to the west, on Hound. And we were showing in that live tracking, which I honestly don't know how it works, and I don't know the voodoo magic that goes into it. But we were looking good, and then we got passed by 2 boats on both sides. So like, uh-oh. Race 4 did not start very good for us. And Frank on Blue Skies jumped out. They were behind us at the bottom of the stream. They jumped out to 11 miles in front of us like that. Hound kept lagging. Just heading to Bermuda going real quick. And we started to feel the heat, as it were, and trying to figure out how we could thread this needle with Frank getting, as I saw it, and correct me if I'm wrong, you carried on further east of the rum line. Yeah. You probably got something advantageous off the cold eddy, and you minimized disadvantage.
That was the hope of the second one.
Well, it was there.
I know.
We got a knot or so for a while. Yeah. And then we got in a position where we didn't know exactly where the chips were going to fall, but if we got headed enough, then we'd have an upwind battle with Blue Skies, which we could figure out how that would go, but then Hound would demolish us. If we got lifted, Hound would do great, and you guys would probably outreach us, and we were in a tough spot, and we were trying to watch the winds, and we ended up, I'll be perfectly honest, Lady Luck plays a hand in here. As much as I like to try and do as good a job as I can do, put everything on the line that we can do, there is an element of circumstance here. And I think a navigator's role is to minimize that element of circumstance to the largest extent possible. But
This is Sunday.
okay.
Just get an idea what the winds were looking like down towards Bermuda.
Yeah, so yeah, we're going hard on the breeze, and I think we're pulling down at about this latitude. We started pulling down 3 models, the GFS, the Euro, and then the Expedition Wharf model. So again, not a question of having enough data. It's how do you disseminate too much data. The winds swung a bit further left than we anticipated. And here was where we had to make some hard decisions on, I think at that point maybe Kitchen Shoals was bearing 170, and we were cogging 155-ish, 150-ish. And favored tack by a country mile. You clearly say our VMC is miles better here. But we're having a conversation of, we're going to need, as it stands right now, we need a 25-degree righty to lay. In another 6 hours, we're going to need a 35-degree righty to lay. And I don't see it. The forecasts don't show it. And we're going to have to make a choice. Where are we going to call max left? And I think when we saw numbers tick into the 180s, we said we got to jump on this. Because we're not going to lay. There's no circumstance that has us laying. So anytime we saw winds in the low 190s, high 180s, we took opportunities to get back to the west. And there it was, well, we needed to to reach to be able to stay up with Hound, and we needed to beat to get ahead of Frank. And Lady Luck smiled on us to give us just enough reaching and just enough beating to accomplish both by a few minutes. So it was quite a race, and that was a little bit of our strategy, a little bit of what was happening. I suppose with that I can answer any questions, or I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, happy to answer any questions anyone might have. Yeah.
So I took a quick look at Karina's track on down through with yellow brick and so forth. And I guess the basic question I have, after you exited the stream and
Frank passed us.
and the last eddy, to me, and correct me, because I was just glancing at this, it seemed like you went east of the rum line. Is that true? And if it is, how far east did you go, and were there any decisions associated with that?
We didn't go east. We came out of the bottom of the Gulf Stream, slightly west of Rum Line, and we had not a debate, but a discussion on a board. And this is always a tough thing I find in distance racing. It's not really an answerable question. You know the wind's going left. You're doing a buoy race. You foot into the header. You go fast to the header and be the first one to the left. Alternatively, in an offshore race, you say, well, perhaps before this happens, I can get enough to the right that when I'm headed, I'll leg. So you bank it. And you're in this, do I bank it or do I foot? And we ended up saying, you know what, let's bank it a bit. And Barrett Holby, who's the skipper of the boat, who's done this race, I think 25, 26 times, was saying, always coming to Bermuda, always get headed, I always wish I had more westing. So we made a decision to say, okay, we're gonna hold about 10 miles of westing off of the rum line, because it was a debate, send it to the barn or hold the westing. We paralleled the rum line 10 miles west of the rum line to a point maybe 125 miles from Bermuda, and then we sent it to the barn. And that westing turned out to be, that probably, at the end of the day, saved the race for us.
No question.
Yeah, because that was when it was really nip and tuck with you. And
Yeah, two things on this. You do remember that there was some discussion of southerly to southeasterly winds in the forecast, south of 35. Number one. And number two, these are all true directions, by the way. You know, we deal most of the world with magnetic, so it's going to be a little more westerly in all of this, what you're looking at. Very important to realize that. So there was some, and then there was the ring that we looked at a moment ago, that was far down. How do I go back?
yeah,
This guy down in here, there was some advantage, there was thought to be some
Yeah.
advantage to being a little bit east.
yeah. And
But I can tell you, and I've said it in here before, that Boland's religion doesn't allow him to go east of the rum line. Okay? Because 9 times out of 10 of the 20 or so, you end up beating back to Bermuda. And what did we do but end up beating back to Bermuda? We were started out 5 miles or so east of the rum line, blue sky. So, I mean, there's all of those factors that get into it. The forecast really had a little bit of an indication that there may have been some advantage to be east,
yeah.
and didn't work out that way.
Yeah, and then the cold eddies were tough to know. 'Cause we ended up, get back to the temperature for a second? Our route, where we started to give up our westing, it was actually right about here. And we always take a couple things as known. It's like sail the boat straight to Bermuda and minimize distance. Then south of the stream, we put a little more trust in the wind and less trust in cold eddy position and strength. So we put the knowns on, like, okay, head to Bermuda, trust the gribs, check against the altimetry. And when we got here, I'm like, oh no, that's right too. And we started to see the current, but we were just kissing like the 2 o'clock position of that cold eddy.
Right.
We stopped banking, we started our foot mode there. So. Anyone else?
Yeah, speak.
Sorry, maybe my English is not perfect, so I'll try, but on the left shift at the end, maybe 4 or 5 hours the left 20 degrees left shift, next last 12 hours. My guess was the cloud was the principal reason why we got it. Because I didn't really see on the motors, and I thought it was the cloud that made the wind left shift for a few hours, and then it came back slowly.
I'm sure that it was. That squall that came through made things very strange. When we finished, I'm sure we could just debate the new scoring and talk about that. Based on how tight everything was, probably did its job. So the results came up pretty quick, and we saw we had just gotten hammered by a few minutes. Like, wow, this is looking good. And then we start motoring around to Hamilton. The wind swings out to 260 at 20 knots. I'm like, oh no. I hope this is a land effect. Yeah, go ahead.
We were next to you, I think, on Sunday, breezing up, and
Yeah. You breezed right up.
yeah. Well, as we made a decision right then, as you saw, to go further west, and I'm curious what dialogue you might have had to say. No, this is far enough. It seemed like you were clearly staying at that sort of 10 miles west from Rum, as we.
I think about where you were next to us, we probably was in this vicinity. We were starting to send it to the barn.
Right.
Which was close enough to upwind. The thing, there's a bit of an adage in distance racing is you never go upwind. You always go fast upwind. So if you're going to go upwind, you're going 2/10 over target, depending on your boat, 3/10 over target. So we started our fast upwind mode at that point.
Yeah. Thank you. We were having the same dialogue, and it was interesting to see.
Yeah.
You have a trophy. We have nothing.
Circumstance plays its role. So,
At the time, you had a number 3 up. I think you had a sail change to a number 3 when you started.
we did. Then you breezed right up in the middle of that. We had a 2 up and we went to a 3. And as Reeves will say, Carina is a tender boat. You wouldn't know it looking at it, but it gets overpowered really quickly. And in 20 knots of wind, we'll have a 3 and a reef quite easily. And it made us do a lot of sail changes. So, yeah.
Can we go back to the Gulf
Could you
Stream?
stand up when you have to
Sorry, yeah.
speak?
Can we go back to the Gulf Stream entry? I'm just interested in what you were looking at in determining when to enter. We were on Allegiant. We were 10 miles east of you, way too far east.
Yeah.
And that really hit us hard.
We were looking at the models.
You looking at RTOS or?
We were looking at everything. We were looking at Artos, Mercator, Current Lab,
Yeah.
and Jennifer Clark. Now, unlike Frank, looking at the stuff isn't my day job.
Right.
So I rely on the people whose day jobs it is to do a lot of the interpretation. I don't try to reinterpret. But I said, okay, there is a difference between the models.
Yeah.
And we said a reasonable hedged position is to be west, because getting back east is always going to be easy.
Right.
You either crack the sheets, you set a jib top, you set a code 0, you use the stream itself.
Yeah.
And that was a regret of the race, that we wished we had entered the stream even further west than we did.
And did you look at any of the current pre-Gulf Stream? Did that factor in at all?
A little bit, but to tell a dirty little secret, we were calibrating the speed up until nearly the start of the race, because I had low confidence in our speed. So something was going funny with the speed up. And I knew well enough that the only way you know current is delta between boat speed and SOG. So if we had low speed confidence, we have low current confidence. So there was a stretch where we were showing positive
Yeah.
for a while, and I was somewhat concerned that our speed was just reading slow. As the race went on, I did fidget with a little bit, and I got more comfortable. But the currents, I believe them to have been slightly favorable here, but not. We weren't doing anything magical to go for it.
That makes sense. Thank you.
That's a very important point about the instrumentation and the confidence in your instrumentation. Hardly any of us spend enough time calibrating instruments before we go out there.
And you probably shouldn't do it minutes before the start of the race.
And the same thing goes for probably looking at your polars. You know, now with Expedition and the strip chart, it's pretty easy to record an infinity of data and do the analysis and really get an idea how good or bad your polars are. but the instrument calibration and the reliance on the instrumentation, we all have problems
Yeah.
with that, is something that we really need to pay attention to.
Yeah, I think it's easy to be over-reliant. It's easy to be over-reliant on the instruments. It's particularly easy to be over-reliant on routing solutions.
Oh.
I think you have to assume they're wrong and then prove to yourself that they make some sense and they're right. So, being reasonably skeptical of the data in is an important part. Anyone else?
Anybody else? Evan, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Brad.
Who else do we have here? Anybody from Gibbs Hill?
Lose it. There's Lou.
Huh?
Lou.
The first place was, what, Summer Storm? You there? Speak. How'd you do? How'd you do it? And the name is?
Lou.
Hi, Lou.
Howdy. So, I was just thinking about what I might share in comparison to the earlier speaker. I'm a lot shorter to the point, so all I could really think of is that we started up here and we went down there really, really fast in nearly a straight line. We were a little bit over here and a little bit over there, and we have such great trimmers and drivers that we overall did well. Any questions?
Actually, a few years ago, we talked about the difference between Comanche and pick a name, Blue Skies. Big difference. And it may very well be, for Summer Storm, that you sort of set the course at 161, and what the stream is doing for you in terms of speed over the ground and to the target means relatively little. At 18 knots, a 3 or 4 knot boost doesn't really mean very much relative to somebody that's going along at 7 knots, sort of a thing. So that may not be far off, right?
Well, I was making a little fun of myself and my
Good.
uncomfortability. Yeah, but I think your general point is right. And I remember back to when Stan Honey did Rambler years ago, and just went off to the east, crossed the current as quickly as possible to get through it, and then just solely focused on the wind.
Right.
And that's kind of what I was hoping for this year, because the percentage that the current helps is much more for smaller boats than it is for faster boats. And so in the weeks before the race, I was looking at your stuff and some of the other stuff online, and there was none of this meander right along the run line, and I was very, very happy. But then as we got closer to the race, all of a sudden I was like, geez, now everybody's going to get it, if they get it. And the reality is, I very much agree with the comments earlier, that this year was a year where it was very difficult for the models to predict the stream. And so I spent more time than you would realize working on our solutions, through that portion of the racetrack.
Right.
And, if I were to back up and start over again in my remarks, I would say our race was really determined in the weeks and months leading up to our race, because as some of you may have heard, the boat that we raced was sitting in a boatyard in Germany 4.5 months ago. And so it's a tremendous credit to the team's owner and skipper, Andrew Burden, and Alex Snyder, the boat captain, to make it happen, that we even simply had a boat to race. And that's only half the battle, is having the boat, because then, to prepare well for an offshore race like this, there's just an endless amount of stuff that you have to do. And literally the boat came off the ship and we raced it in the Block Island distance race. And then we did some practice, some training. And one thing that we're really religious about is the calibration and figuring out our polars and our sail charts. And I don't know, some of you may have seen, I just recently wrote an article in Sailing World about that. So a little bit of that philosophy is embedded in our performance, because we knew exactly our calibrations, and we had a pretty good idea, not a perfect idea, about our sail chart and our polars. Like, our polars were pretty well developed, but on older sails. And fortunately, one of the other things that we have as an asset to our program is Stu Bannatyne from Doyle Sails. You know, one of the greatest ocean racers ever.
Right.
And Stu, you know, out of the blocks already knows what the sail chart should look like. But one of the things I love about him is that he's at heart a scientist and open-minded about testing things and proving whether something's faster, A or B. And I was discussing this actually with my daughter, Vary, who's sitting in the back of the room. And we realized that there's kind of an interesting analogy that if you don't know how fast all of your sails are, it's kind of like playing chess, but not being 100% sure of what all the pieces do. Yeah. And so we worked real hard in the lead up to the race of figuring out our boat. And we did rating studies. We ended up with a beautiful J0, which we used an awful lot during the race. And so all that helped, all that preparation that Andy and Alec did, and all the work that Stu did, you know, and then of course the team that we had is extraordinary. I mean, Alec kept saying it's probably one of the best individuals that have been on a Bermuda race team. And, you know, being on the boat, it's just a pleasure to watch people at the top of their game do their thing. So that's super fun. The other thing that I would say is I also broke the race up into segments. And maybe I'm just a masochist, but I had a lot more segments than you did. So it meant a lot of work. Like I felt like no sooner would you get to one segment and you'd rest for like 4 or 5 minutes, and then you're trying to figure out the next one.
How much sleep did you get? Right.
As much as I could, which was not a lot because I didn't even have a bunk, which is unfortunate. But yeah, in terms of our segments, you know, we care a lot about the starts, and I think if you go back and look at the footage, we smashed it. Like we were really, you know, on a high. Like our bowman said we were half a boat length off the line, and in the box, I had us 0.3 boat lengths off the line and 99% polar boat speed. So we were just off like a rocket right off the start. And so we were tangling with Pyewacket and Proteus, you know, all the big boys of the fleet. And that was a thrill. And then we were on the left side and we just ramped right out. And so we had a great start. And that's our first section of the race. So we spend a lot making sure our start calibrations are strong. And then we got offshore and the breeze is obviously softening. Some of us on the boat were on Warrior 1 2 years ago. And had some success in this race in the Gibbs Hill class. And we have the shared trauma of that cold front that came through and then killed the breeze. And we were worried that would happen again, but the cold front was different this year than it was 2 years ago. It didn't behave the same way. So our next race was to the windmills. And, you know, with such good sailors, we just kept the boat moving, just wiggling as best we could. And when we got to the south side of the windmills, we were sitting next to Pyewacket and Proteus, which made us feel really good about the first 2 sections of the race. And then that third section, I would say, is dealing with some of the eddies and figuring out where our entry point was to the Gulf Stream. And there, you know, I spend a lot of time with Chris Bedford, who's a fantastic meteorologist. And because I'm lazy where I can be, I was really relying on him to tell me, after all of his work, like which would be the best model to use. And he was pretty dead set on the Mercator model until 2 days before the race. And he just said, it's messy as hell, figure it out yourself. And so I did. And so what I did was I had all of the models. I downloaded the satellite imagery all the time and the altimetry, and I was making my own comparisons. And then ground truthing it with the sea surface temperature data that I had on the boat and the highly well-calibrated current information. And then I could sort of geo-reference myself across all these different models and across the real-time data points. And so I did that before entering, and I did realize, it was my theory anyway, that the entry point was further to the west than the models would have suggested.
Even the Mercator.
Even the Mercator. Yeah, Mercator was wrong in my opinion.
Right.
And so the good news is also by having such incredibly strong watch captains, Richard Clark, whose name you guys probably know, he was watching both the set and adrift and the sea surface temperature. And we talked so much about what to expect. When we first poked our nose in it, he didn't feel like we were 100% in it. And so we stayed on the breeze a little bit longer to get a little further west. And we actually saw the sea surface temperature rise to a maximum and then start declining.
84 or so, 85?
Yeah, somewhere in that vicinity. And so it was really when we saw the sea surface temperature declining again that we were like, okay, now we can bear off a little bit and get rumbling. And it was during that period of time that I got a little bit of rest because you have that long meander runway now. But during the stream, because I don't like to bias it towards any one given model because you never know what's really going to be right all the time. So I redid the whole exercise again in the middle of the stream because I wanted to make sure I was in that core of the river, and the reality is at one point, one of the guys on the team, I think it was Chris Welch, who's an amazing driver trimmer, he said to me, he was like, Louis, there's good news and there's bad news. The good news is you found the Gulf Stream. You're right smack dab in it. The bad news is you just told the entire fleet behind you where it is.
Where to go.
Because if you had looked at our speed over ground on the tracker, we were doing 16 knots upwind, which is just an extraordinary number. Because our polars are on our BMG upwind are only in the 9s, right? And so we were cracked off a little bit for sure, but we were smoking, and it was fun. But then, as much as we're all enjoying the ride, then we got to figure out when to get off the ride. And I was cognizant of Frank's religion, of not getting too far east. And that's when we had sort of an emergency meeting of the minds, because you didn't want to get an adverse current with that one. And there was a favorable one on the other side that looked like it was going to extend the ride. And so it was a little bit of a gamble. And I remember Richard Clark on this one too. He said, because we both love Formula One, and there was a Formula One race going on during our race, which we may have snuck a peek at because we have Starlink. And he called it the chicane, where you may try and hook into that favorable current and miss the adverse current at the risk of being a little further east, knowing that we were probably going to be dead upwind at the end. And so we ended up hedging. And that was a meeting that Richard, Stu, and I had.
And hedging how much? You did go a little east.
We didn't go as far as the routing would have suggested, because that would have had us go another 10 miles
No.
east. And
Right.
so we didn't do that.
Yeah.
We had a
45.
much more straight course.
Right.
And as much as others may have been looking at us, we were looking at Pyewacket as well, because it's a very well sailed boat, obviously. And so in the end, I think we managed that portion as well, pretty well. So we had a really good Gulf Stream exit point, and then we had an intermediate waypoint for the eddy, which was another segment of our race. And then the final portions of the race were the upwind to get close to the island, and then of course finding the teeny tiny little finish line nestled right up against a reef. Each one of those, and it's funny because once you get to the coastal part, you forget all about the ocean race. It's a coastal race, and then it's basically a windward leeward at that point, because we were dead upwind and trying to hit the shifts coming in and play the current a little bit and figure out the favored end of the line. So we worked at 100% all the time. There was no let up, no goofing around. It was almost like a military operation of executing. And I think ultimately it was our crew that won the race, along with the preparation of the sails with the partnership with Doyle, and all the work that Andy, our owner, and Alec, our boat captain, did to get us ready. Because essentially it's a Super Series 52, which I don't know if any of you saw the Super Series boats in Newport right before our start, but those guys drill holes everywhere in the deck so that all the lines are run beneath the deck. And the unfortunate thing about that is those holes leak, when you go offshore. And so there was a tremendous amount of water. And fortunately, we had a guy on the boat who loves to optimize bilge pumps, of all things. And so we had 6 bilge pumps running all the time to try and keep our boat afloat.
And what about your shirts? It's raining, right?
Well, some people, really smart people like our owner, Andrew, he tried never to go down below. And if he did, it would be a short 2 steps and a leap up into his bunk. So on that boat, you really want to stay down below as little as possible. Because to call it even a nav station is a gross misrepresentation.
Exaggeration.
Yeah, it was more like a torture chamber.
We can all agree on that. That's what Devin was saying before.
That's all I got.
That's great, Lou. Great. Are there any questions?
There's one online that says, did any of the models accurately predict what the stream was going down lower east of the rum line? I didn't see it anywhere in the RTOFs, Mercator, or HICOM.
What's the question?
Did any of the models accurately predict what the stream was doing lower down?
Yes.
Which one?
I'm reminded of that famous expression that a magician never has to share all of his tricks. But there was one.
We won't get into a discussion of turbulence and
You can see me afterwards.
what it might be. What it might be. You got the message? We're back to our preparation. I heard lots of preparation from Lou, right? And then the matter of sailing the boat. It seems like it's self-evident, but so often it's something we're going along and we're feeling pretty comfy and, give me a sandwich and just shift it out. The continual chasing, particularly under some of these conditions that we're probably going to see more of. The weather is getting more difficult to forecast and the conditions are getting to be quite a bit shifty. That squall that came through a corkscrew for a fair number of us. Where'd that come from? Sort of thing. You gotta be ready for that. Okay, how we doing?
It's 3:45.
2:45. They're gonna kick us out of here at some point. If so, Karina, anybody from the double-handed?
Well, not that wants to speak about it.
If you're the sole rep of the double-handed, speak to me. Oh, Mr. Becker, come on. Peter Becker, Young America.
How many have done double-handed or solo? Yeah, it's a wonderful thing. Oh, Zach's here. He did way better than I did. So I think you just heard from fully crewed boats that really have a navigator that's dedicated to paying a lot of attention to all the details all the time.
Right.
And what I learned in this race was, no matter how much work I did in advance of the start, it was those poor few moments during the race that I was able to run down below, and we got Starlink, like it's an arms race, so we met the technology challenge, but you know what? I didn't have enough time to go sit down there and update and model and compare and do all that kind of stuff. So we made some seat-of-the-pants calls. Getting out of Block Island, out of Narragansett Bay that was like old school, just scrappy sailing, and we did really well with that. As soon as we got offshore and tried to pick the entry point in the stream, I sucked. I kind of thought that because the models weren't agreeing, and I kind of looked at I said, boy, if I'm that hot flowing river of water, I'm going to have inertia. I'm going to take this meander a little further east. It's not going to migrate west. That was Peter's thinking. Well, that was all wrong. And so we didn't get that slave ride that others got. It was really our failure was not spending enough time analyzing underway all the subtle details. So we were off.
During the race or before?
During the race, because I did tons of work before the race, but that's just setting the table.
Right.
The real story is what the other navigators have spoken about, is like real-time analysis underway. So short-handed sailing is a little bit one arm behind your back because you don't have the luxury of sitting at the nav table, even if it's a torture chamber, which on a 105 it certainly is. So anyway, So Frank, I have a question for you. If you look at the high res rapid refresh, right?
Yeah.
Which we know when it's your inshore, it knows thermal breezes, it knows where the land is, it's like amazing. Do you think the HRR knows that these are hot bodies of, hot blobs of water here, and do you think the model
It does now.
incorporates that? Yeah.
It should and does now. The models better handle the blobs of high temperature water offshore than did a few years ago.
Because that's what I was inferring from just looking at the results.
Yeah.
And I had that in my mind about, okay, how's the wind shifting as the surface temperature changes,
Or intensifying.
or intensifying?
Yeah.
So, just,
I say HRRR will do a pretty good job of that.
so I'll never forget, Joe Sinko's classmate, everybody knows Joe from, NOAA, weather briefings, all that, and Joe goes, I've been watching ship reports all my professional career, and there's always more wind on warm water. So when you're in the slope, don't go to the cold stuff, find the warm stuff. So that didn't seem to be too much of a story this year, but in past races, it was a biggie.
The system was dominated by the hives.
Yeah.
And they were, and the other thing, of course, that's important to realize, besides the true and magnetic issue, is the scale of the models. You're looking at grid spacing that may be 15 miles. Now, the HRRR is 3 kilometers.
Right.
So you can get that down to 1.5 miles. That's sort of reasonable. But most of the weather models that we're dealing with cover a very large area. We care about a 50-foot patch of ocean. And if you're sitting in a wind field that's fairly turbulent, you can expect to see a little bit of this and a little bit of that. But that's why you see you get to Gardner's Bay and Long Island Sound, you can be 50 yards apart and sailing in different breezes. And you see some of the same thing going on out here.
So Frank, tell me about the WRF, because you can get really high res close to the island.
Yeah,
Is that doing the same thing as the
sure.
HRR?
Yeah.
Okay, that's
You
what,
hope
that's
it
what we
is.
assume.
We gotta hope it is.
Yeah.
But you're also watching it all the time. I mean, you're sailing to what you're getting. Confirming the models. That's where your instrumentation is.
So here's my pitch, Frank. We need more short-handed sailors. I mean, this is a bomb. It is so much fun out there. So much fun, I don't care how we score it, because it's really a blast. So, we're doing a return race on Sunday, if anybody wants to join it, single or double. Anyway.
Good, thank you,
Hope
Peter.
that helps.
Okay, what are we missing?
Finisterre.
What is it?
Finisterre.
Finisterre. Famous name. Top of the class. Commodore?
Northeast wind is.
Not me.
Anybody in the Finisterre class?
Anybody from Northeast wind?
And how up? I'm sorry?
Northeast wind 1.
Anybody from them? We have a number of reps from the Finisterre class. I know that. Would you care to speak a little bit about your strategy and your problems and your
Well,
ways
I'll
to handle the
talk a little bit
problems?
to,
Mr. Gowell?
yeah, I'm gonna turn it over to Dan Ferrier, who's a navigator. We were, it's a rough race, it's bumpy. I have a different boat than I used to have, not temptress anymore. It's a 45,000 pound Tayana 52 with all roller furling everything. We were doing really well in the first part of the race, first 2/3 of the race, and then we got distracted with keeping some systems running. So that really took our eye off the ball, and we had to, kind of ease up on some of our, what we would otherwise have done more sail changes, which is in the roller furling, we had, 2 reef points in the jib and 2 reef points in the staysail and 2 reef points in the main. And we were able to use that pretty effectively. It was all Doyle sails, and they did a nice job with that. But, as we started to have power issues, we couldn't use electric winches, and, we're really not set up for, a lot of in and out of the sails. So Dan Ferrier was a strategist and navigator, so maybe Dan wants to talk about it.
Take it away, Dan.
Yeah. So we did have 2 wins, so that was a big disadvantage. We tried to get our instruments calibrated, so we had a trust factor, right? So the first part of the race, we were probably entering the stream. I think we executed that really well and through the stream because we were first in class at the 400-mile mark, and 400 miles to go, I should say. And so, but it was really the bottom third of the race where we really had some challenges. We basically got a little too far too far east of Rum. We knew there was going to be a lift to the island, but it didn't really materialize as much as we did, so we ended up having some challenges. But preparation was really important, making sure that your instruments are calibrated. What everyone said was definitely a big thing. I guess I would have a question for the other fellow navigators in the room, is what about, no one's talked about the waves. I mean, the waves in this race were huge.
It was very
And I'm just curious, to what extent you guys looked at the wave effect with your polars? Was that factored into your equations at all when you did your,
Yes.
yeah?
Yeah. It's a challenge, like it's an imperfect science, because, to do it properly, you would have to test in all those conditions and create polars for those conditions. And so you try and do rough justice to how the waves might affect your polars and how fast you're going at different angles and speeds. But the reality is, for us, I think that's, with the waves, what they weren't that big relative to our speed. And so I think the polars also can do a good job of taking that into account. So overall, it didn't require much adjustment on our part to handle the waves. But the reality is, and one of the wonderful things about Expedition right now is that you can do that.
Sure.
You can draw areas and reduce your polars and do all sorts of exotic stuff. But then the problem becomes, and this is something that Stan harps on all the time, is that once you start making manual adjustments, you lose track of what the route is and what you've done to the route. And then of course when you're tired and sleep deprived, sometimes you'll also forget that you twisted the wind 10 degrees or you adjusted your polars, and then you screw yourself for the rest of the race.
Yeah.
So you have to be very, very careful when you start monkeying around with things.
much less sophisticated. We tuned them down to 95% for
Yeah,
routing.
that's what we did.
And taking the kind of waves, and just the imperfection of the science, I suppose.
Yeah.
We recognize it, but yeah, it's tough to, it's chaotic, so how right can you be?
Yeah, every boat is gonna show a different performance on that. I think what goes on is, were the waves large by oceanographic standards? No. Were they there and did they affect boat performance? Very often. So you're sailing along and the wave field starts to build up and you're watching your performance as it's going. And on this particular boat, it starts to hobby horse. And you see it in the performance. So you want to break off a little.
Exactly.
You're going to have to do it, sort of a thing. On some others, Carina, you may not have to do that at the same time. You may, another half an hour, I give you another half a foot of wave amplitude, and then you have to do it. So it's how the boat performs. The Ocean 38 is going to be different than Carina. It's going to be different.
Yeah, so along those lines, it seemed that the waves were, it had a shorter period than normal.
They did.
It wasn't, the big waves are no problem,
Right.
but when they're short and choppy, and then you get these waves coming from a different direction,
Quite right.
which we witnessed. So as we would try to keep up and get to the east, we'd slow down. And then so we had a debate, Dan and I had a debate, it's like, we had to go faster down the track and just get down the track and deal with the consequences later. And he was much more, we gotta stay east, but we did a little bit, I mean, we did the best we could. And that squall definitely,
Well, the end.
That was squirrely.
definitely
Yeah.
sort of threw the, took the wheels off of our race, yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
Lou?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to that point. That was an excellent point. That was an excellent point. And again, something I'd say when you have the luxury of really good crew, one of the things that we have on our boat is one of the number displays has our polar boat speed percentage on a 2-minute average. And the drivers and trimmers are so good that they're watching the trade-offs between height and speed. And because we collaborate so well, they know exactly what the game plan is. And they can make real-time adjustments for those waves to make sure that we're going as fast as possible, consistent with the overall game plan. And I think that was, one of the secrets to the success, is just how good our crew is.
Gets pretty sophisticated. For the general driver, it's goddamn uncomfortable. And then it starts to show up in speed, and you make some adjustments.
Right, and we don't have the instrumentation that like a Gibson would have. We're a cruising boat, so we don't. And we could easily have some more instrumentation.
Well, you can bring that up on.
The problem is our knot meter wasn't working, so we had no true wind speed. Everything was apparent, and we were driving above our polars pretty consistently until we tried to get more east, and then we slowed down and bang, So anyway, that's it.
Questions? All perfectly clear, huh? That's great. How are we doing? Any other classes that would like to speak out? How about, okay, so you're gonna say I got a captive audience here. How many people had Iridium Go? Only? Oh, everybody carries an Iridium Go. I sort of have it in my pocket. How many had Iridium broadband? Like a Certus 200 Palace. Okay?
How about the exec?
Iridium exec.
Yeah.
That's-
Oh, the exec, sorry, sure. The Go exec.
How many had that?
Someone had that. You had that, okay? And then how many had that infernal Elon Musk invention? How many? I'm surprised. I thought there might even be more. Problems. Power?
Yes.
Power.
Yes.
Power's the issue.
Yeah.
And you solved it by big battery stack and hydro generators?
No. So on Summer Storm, I had a conversation with the boat captain, and he asked me to come up with a consumption plan for power. And I told him, perhaps unhelpfully, like I've never done that before, I don't even know how to do it. The only other time that I've had Starlink, I was fortunate enough to be on Law Connect 100 for the Sydney Hobart, and we had the engine running the entire time. So I never once thought about power. So I was like, I don't know. Like when we went out training, we actually marked it in our log to see how much it would draw during a 2-hour training session. So we had that one data point, and then we tried to extrapolate how much gas we would have. But then the strangest thing happened because, for over a decade, I've worried about the exact point you made, Frank, that I forget to turn off the satellite communication, and you just run up a bill, and then Bill Gates starts updating Windows, and then you're totally in the shit. And I've had literally nightmares waking up in not racing, that I left the satellite stuff on, and there's going to be like a $78,000 bill. But the funny thing is with the Starlink is that I was satellite constrained, but for the opposite reason. Like, it wasn't now money because it's just a flat fee, it was power. And so what I tried to do is anytime we had to charge the batteries anyway, it was party time. The satellite Starlink was on, and I'm downloading everything, and I'm watching Formula One, and I'm doing whatever the hell I want. But then as soon as we stopped charging the batteries, then I'm down in the dungeon, like flicking it on, downloading, flicking it off, because I don't want to draw too much consumption. And so I think it's funny that it's this same mentality, that there's scarcity, but it's just a different thing that you're managing. But on balance, Starlink is a game changer. And in the Transpac, we had the opportunity to put Starlink on, and I'm and maybe you can bleep this out, Kate, but I'm a little afraid of
It's
Elon
live.
Musk and his whims, that he might turn it off in the middle of my race and I don't have anything. But I'm over it, man. I'm sold. Like, Starlink, it is so awesome to be able to just hop on, look at the radar, look at the clouds in real time, download grids, download positions, download anything you want.
There was some
It's helpful.
issue over the last couple of years with it, with demand. You might come into an area where all of a sudden you find your service had a lower priority than his service. That's getting less and less, as they're getting more satellites in orbit, low orbit. So I think that'll be less of an issue down the road. But it's an interesting piece of equipment. It certainly, the hope along the way is that Iridium would keep an eye on some of this and modify some of their billing practices. Okay, we're getting near to the end here. I think we're getting, because we have some other things to do tonight, like dinner. The race itself, communications, information acceptance, how you got to the leaderboard or how you got to your emails, ways to do it better, problems with it, flows of information, all good? Speak.
The program was.
Can't hear you.
The program was difficult to navigate. The program that you.
What program?
The one that had all the list of the boats and like just trying to find out what class people were in or the printed program.
They didn't print a program. Do you mean things like
No,
the
we
start?
did.
I'm
We
sorry.
did.
Do you mean things like the start group and then the scratch sheet?
Everything's online.
That came too late.
Yeah, we couldn't find the scratch sheet. Yes. We couldn't find it.
That's true. They're all shy to say it.
It's because I'm standing right here.
Needs improvement. Yeah, speak, please. Up. You can?
Sorry, self-identified idiot, and I just would like you to know that the 2022 scratch sheet is up. And so, if you're on your way to the start and you think you have everything dialed in, and you look it up and you realize you're an hour past the start and you're freaking out that you just should have started, it's actually 2 years prior, and I don't know why we still continue to keep the 2022 info online when it's gone. So maybe in the future you could take that stuff offline so that us idiots will start. I did start off.
You're not alone.
And then the last thing, how about the inshore start? Port Adams. Good, better, and different.
Good.
Overall, no problems. Basically, everything. If they're happy with what they saw onshore, we're not unhappy with what we saw offshore, for the most part. Speak, up please.
Finish line, lights on the buoys would improve our performance.
Or just having some buoys.
How about an AIS speaking on the Ethereum? You know, they had it a few years ago, and the lights. But that'll certainly come up. We can bring that up at Brock on Saturday. Anything else?
Frank.
In the back, please. Up.
Dave's up.
Hey, you know, Frank, the little boats ought to start first, not last, because we love watching the fast boats go by. So you don't
David?
Yeah, I just want to comment on one of Frank's comments, his favorite one. Don't forget to look out the window. The squall, there's been a lot of comments about that. And one of our daughters has this incredible distant vision. I happen to be driving and we're going along okay. And she said, Dad, what do you think about this? What is that over there? You know? Holy moly. Okay, put another reef in the main. We got to do a headsel change. You want to peel it? I said, no, drop it. Bald headed. Get the fore up. We didn't have time to put our foulies on by the time it hit us. Yeah. We all got soaking wet, but we sailed through the first one. We looked around and we got through that one okay. Then here comes another one. So, like Frank says, don't forget to look out the window.
Hey, Frank, not a lot of talk about safety, but we had 2 rescues, right? And I guess one observation was we were in between a couple that we could only hear half the conversation. there were boats relaying information, and I know that we're trying to reach boats individually with their sat phone, but it strikes me there should be a way that they could sound out a broadcast message to the whole fleet somehow, some way, more efficiently in the event of an event like that happens again, right? So,
Add to the notices what's going on
Yeah,
in terms of.
I mean-
Well, like the lat line of the person in distress.
We actually,
a lot of chatter on 16, and we could only hear half of it, and people were talking to each other,
Yeah.
it was, could have been,
and we heard nothing of it.
yeah.
Did you hear him?
Sometimes one side of it, I guess one point to that, and it's a pretty old school, but pretty effective sideband.
God bless him.
And
We have,
everyone
we
can
actually
hear,
have it,
everyone can.
we have it in attendance, the rescue team that was involved in that, Mr. Van Voorhees and his group actually. Brian Rousseau was responsible for communication.
I was the one on the radio, the Navigator on the boat that we went for. Very professional mariner. His radio skills were amazing and made it really easy for us to make the decision to go get him.
Thank you. Thank you. Twice. I think that's all we have for this year, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much.
Thank you.